the Iron Throne of Shadows. The war had lasted 300 years, and Commander Sarathax had fought in 270 of them. Her crimson armor bore the scars of 1,000 battles, and her reputation made enemy fleets retreat at the mere sight of her flagship. She was the undefeated champion of the Krillian Empire, the warrior who had never lost a battle, never shown weakness, never shed a single tear. What the Empire didn't know was that she had forgotten how. The neural conditioning required for elite warriors was irreversible. Pain receptors dulled, fear responses eliminated, emotional vulnerability erased. Sarathax could command armies and destroy planets, but she could no longer remember what her daughter's laughter sounded like, or why the sunset used to make her feel peaceful, or what it meant to cry. Her flagship, the Crimson Dawn, orbited the conquered world of Terravine, the latest addition to the Empire. The humans had surrendered after only 6 months of resistance, unusual for such a stubborn species. Now they worked in service positions throughout the fleet, invisible and ignored. Among them was Daniel Foster, assigned to maintain the commander's private botanical garden, a strange luxury for a warship, but one Sarathax had insisted upon. The garden was filled with plants from conquered worlds, each one a trophy, a reminder of victory. Daniel tended them with quiet efficiency, never speaking unless spoken to, never making eye contact with the Krillian crew. The flower that refused to die. The Memoria blossom is dying again, Sarathax's aide, Subcommander Vex, reported. The third specimen this cycle. Perhaps we should remove it from the collection. No. Sarathax stood before the wilting blue flower, her expression unreadable behind her helmet's visor. Find out why it keeps dying. The Memoria blossom was from her home world, from the garden she'd played in as a child, before the conditioning, before the wars. It was the only thing that remained from that life, and she couldn't explain, even to herself, why she kept trying to keep it alive. Daniel watched this exchange from across the garden, his hand still working on pruning a thornwood vine. He'd learned in his first week that the commander visited this garden every evening at the exact same time, always stopping at the Memoria blossom, always standing there for precisely 12 minutes before leaving. He'd also noticed that the flower wasn't actually dying from neglect or disease. It was dying from loneliness. On Earth, his grandmother had kept a garden, and she'd taught him something the Krillians with all their advanced technology didn't seem to understand. Some plants needed more than water and light. They needed to be spoken to, cared for, loved. The human who dared to speak. 3 days later, Sarathax entered the garden to find Daniel kneeling beside the Memoria blossom, speaking to it in soft English. I know you miss home, he was saying. I miss home too. But we're survivors, you and me. We're still here, still growing, even in places we don't belong. Human. Her voice cut through the garden like a blade. What are you doing? Daniel froze but didn't stand. Talking to the flower, Commander. Plants do not require conversation. With respect, Commander, this one does. He finally looked up at her, and in his eyes, she saw something that made her uncomfortable, not fear, but compassion. It's a Memoria blossom. They're empathic. They respond to emotional resonance. Without it, they die. That is illogical. Plants do not experience emotion. No, but they respond to it. Your people's data would show that every Memoria blossom you've tried to grow has died within weeks. But on your home world, they thrive in populated areas. That's not coincidence. Sarathax's hand moved to her weapon, an instinctive response to being challenged. But something stopped her. Perhaps it was the way the flower's petals had turned slightly toward Daniel, a movement she'd never seen it make before. Continue, she ordered, her voice carefully controlled. Over the next week, something unprecedented happened. Daniel spoke to the Memoria blossom every day, sharing stories about Earth, about his grandmother's garden, about the ocean and mountains and all the beautiful things he'd left behind. And the flower began to recover, its blue petals brightening, its stems straightening. Sarathax found herself arriving at the garden earlier each day, standing in the shadows, listening to the human's voice. He spoke of loss without bitterness, of captivity without rage, of grief with an acceptance she didn't understand. The warrior who couldn't feel. "You lost someone," Sarathax said one evening, stepping out of the shadows. Daniel's hand stilled on the soil. "My wife. During the invasion. She was a teacher. She died protecting her students. That was inefficient. She could have survived. She could have. But she chose not to. Some things are more important than survival, Commander. Nothing is more important than survival." Daniel looked at her then, really looked at her, and saw past the armor to something broken underneath. "Is that what they taught you? The neural conditioning?" Sarathax's hand went to her weapon again, but Daniel didn't flinch. "I know what they do to your elite warriors," he continued quietly. "We intercepted the medical data during the war. They remove your ability to feel pain, fear, grief. They turn you into perfect soldiers. But they take something else too, don't they? They take weakness. They take humanity." Daniel turned back to the flower. "This plant is dying because it's empathic, and there's no emotion for it to connect with. You can't feel anymore, can you, Commander? You stand here every night, trying to connect with this one piece of home you have left, but you can't remember why it matters." The silence that followed was absolute. In 300 years of war, no one had spoken to Sarathax like this. No one had dared to name what had been taken from her. "You should be executed for this insubordination," she said finally. "Yes, Commander." "Why do you risk it?" Daniel smiled sadly. "Because that flower is dying from the same thing that's killing you, Commander. Isolation. And I think, deep down, part of you remembers what it was like to not be alone." The crack in the armor. That night, Sarathax didn't sleep. She stood in her command chamber, staring at her reflection in the viewport. Behind her helmet, her face was a stranger's, harder, colder, efficient. When had she stopped recognizing herself? She accessed her personal files, data logs from before the conditioning. There were images, a small Krillian child playing in a garden, chasing flying insects, holding a memoria blossom and laughing. The child's parents stood nearby, smiling. Sarathax studied the child's face and felt nothing. That person was dead, replaced by the perfect weapon the Empire needed. This was strength. This was power. So why did the human's words echo in her mind like an accusation? The next evening, she arrived at the garden to find Daniel had created something new, a small section dedicated to earth plants. Flowers she didn't recognize grew alongside aggressive thornwood vines and bioluminescent moss from Kelter 4. "What is this?" she demanded. "A memory garden," Daniel replied. "Each plant represents something I don't want to forget. The roses are for my wife. The lavender is for my grandmother. The oak sapling is for Earth itself. Sentiment is weakness. Is it? Or is forgetting weakness?" He touched a rose petal gently. "You've conquered 100 worlds, Commander, but you can't remember why you wanted to save that one flower from your childhood. You've won every battle, but you've lost yourself. Which is the greater victory?" Sarathax felt something inside her chest, not pain, the conditioning prevented that, but an echo of pain, a ghost of what she used to feel. "What do you want from me, human?" "Nothing, Commander. I just thought maybe, if someone showed you it was possible to remember, to feel again, maybe that flower wouldn't have to die alone." The choice that changed everything. The memoria blossom was thriving now, its blue petals luminescent in the artificial light. Daniel's daily conversations had given it what Sarathax's advanced technology couldn't, a connection to living emotion. "Teach me," Sarathax said suddenly. Daniel looked up, surprised. "Commander? Teach me what you do. How you make it respond." "I just talk to it. Share memories. Let myself feel." "I cannot feel." The conditioning. The conditioning blocked the receptors, but the memories are still there. Daniel stood, moving closer to the commander than any human had dared. Your brain remembers, even if your body doesn't process it the same way. You just have to be willing to look. Over the following weeks, something remarkable happened. Every evening, Sarathax came to the garden, and Daniel taught her to remember. He shared his stories, and slowly, haltingly, she began to share hers. She told him about the garden on her home world, about parents who had been proud of her acceptance into the warrior program, not knowing what it would cost. She described her daughter, born before the conditioning, raised by her sister after Sarathax could no longer feel maternal attachment. "She's 19 now," Sarathax said one evening. "I haven't seen her since she was 3. She doesn't know me. Do you want to know her?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Want. Such a simple word, but one that had been stripped from Sarathax's vocabulary. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't know if I can." Daniel knelt beside the Memoria blossom, now fully thriving. This flower bloomed because someone cared enough to try. Maybe that's all it takes, Commander. Maybe you don't need to feel perfectly to start healing. You just need to try. That night, Sarathax did something she hadn't done in 270 years. She removed her helmet in front of another being, letting Daniel see her face fully, the scars, the hardness, the eyes that had forgotten how to cry. "I don't know how to be anything other than this," she whispered. "Then learn," Daniel said gently. "One memory at a time. One moment at a time. The same way we're teaching this flower to live." And for the first time in centuries, Sarathax felt something crack inside the walls the conditioning had built. Not pain, not yet. But the possibility of pain. The ghost of grief. The shadow of hope. It was a beginning. When warriors remember their hearts. The transmission that changed everything. 3 months after that first conversation in the garden, Commander Sarathax did something that shocked her entire command staff. She requested a civilian communication channel to her home world. "Commander, this is highly irregular," Sub-Commander Vex protested. "Military personnel of your rank don't engage in personal communications during active deployment. Nevertheless, I require the channel." Her voice carried the authority that had won 1,000 battles. The communication took 3 days to route through military and civilian networks. When the holographic display finally flickered to life, a young Krillian woman appeared, tall, with the distinctive silver markings of the military caste, but wearing civilian clothes. "Commander Sarathax," the woman said uncertainly. "I'm Kiranel. Your sister said you wanted to speak with me." Sarathax stared at the face of her daughter, now grown, now a stranger. "Kira. You've grown. It's been 16 years. No accusation in the voice, just fact." "Yes." Sarathax's hands, which had never trembled in battle, shook slightly. "I'm told you're studying botanical engineering." Kira's expression softened. "Aunt Mira said you used to love gardening. Before you joined the elite program." "I did. I'm trying to remember that now." The conversation was awkward, stilted, 2 strangers searching for connection across an impossible gulf. But when it ended, Sarathax felt that crack inside her chest widen just a little more. Daniel found her in the garden later that evening, staring at the Memoria blossom. "How did it go?" he asked quietly. "She called me Commander, not Mother." "Did you expect her to?" "No." Sarathax touched the flower petals. "But I hoped." "Is that progress?" "That's tremendous progress," Daniel said with genuine warmth. "Hope is the first step. The fleet that learned to feel." Word of Commander Sarathax's unusual behavior spread through the fleet like wildfire. The undefeated warrior was spending hours in the botanical garden. She was speaking to a human servant as if he were an equal. She'd made a personal communication to family, something elite warriors never did. Some officers viewed it as weakness. Others watched with curiosity. Sub-Commander Vex was among the curious. He appeared at the garden entrance one evening, his expression carefully neutral. "Commander, may I speak freely?" "Always, Vex." The crew is concerned. You've been different since the human began working here. Some fear you're compromised. And what do you fear, old friend? Vex was quiet for a moment. I fear that you're discovering something the rest of us lost, and I don't know if I'm brave enough to want it back. Sarathax turned to face him fully. How long since you spoke to your bonded mate? 14 years. Since my conditioning. Do you remember her name? Silatra. The name came out like a prayer. I remember her name. I remember her face. But I don't remember why she mattered. And if you could remember? If you could feel it again? It would hurt, Vex said simply. Why would I choose pain? Daniel, who had been working quietly in the corner, spoke up. Because pain means you're alive. Because feeling something, even grief, is better than feeling nothing at all. Vex looked at the human, really looked at him. You've lost people in this war. Everyone I loved, Daniel confirmed. My wife, my parents, my best friend. The pain of that loss is unbearable some days. But I'd rather bear it than forget they existed. The revolution blooms quietly. Over the following months, something unprecedented began happening aboard the Crimson Dawn. Other officers started visiting the garden. First Vex, then the tactical officer Rinshaw, then the chief engineer Mordecai. They came quietly, ashamed to be seen seeking something they'd been trained to consider weakness. But they came. Daniel created sections for each of them, small memorial gardens where they could plant seeds and speak to growing things about memories they'd been conditioned to suppress. Slowly, carefully, they began to remember. Rinshaw wept for the first time in 40 years, remembering a sibling who'd died in childhood. Mordecai started composing poetry again, words flowing from a creativity everyone thought the conditioning had destroyed. Vex contacted his bonded mate and heard her voice for the first time in over a decade. The conversation lasted 3 hours. But not everyone welcomed this change. General Kraxthar, commanding officer of the sector fleet, arrived on the Crimson Dawn with accusations of emotional compromise and demands for immediate psychiatric evaluation of all affected personnel. This is precisely why emotional attachment is eliminated, he thundered at Sarathax in her command chamber. You're creating weakness in your fleet. Officers crying over plants, writing poetry, contacting civilians, this is how wars are lost. Is it? Sarathax asked calmly. Because my fleet's efficiency ratings have increased 17%. Combat readiness is at an all-time high. Crew morale has improved dramatically. If this is weakness, General, perhaps we should reconsider our definition of strength. Psychological evaluations show increased emotional responses. Which means my people are regaining what the conditioning took from them. Their humanity. Their ability to remember why they fight, not just how. You're creating soldiers who hesitate. I'm creating soldiers who understand the cost of what they do. Who fight smarter because they have something to lose. Who lead better because they can connect with those they command. Kraxthar's face contorted with rage. The High Command will hear of this. You'll be stripped of command, reconditioned. Let them try. Sarathax's voice carried the weight of 300 years of victory. I've never lost a battle, General. I don't intend to start now. The message that spread across stars. That night, Sarathax made a decision that would change the course of the war. She recorded a message and transmitted it on open channels across the entire Krillian Empire. Her face appeared on screens across 1,000 worlds, unhelmet, vulnerable, real. I am Commander Sarathax, and for 270 years, I have been the Empire's perfect weapon. I have conquered worlds, destroyed fleets, won battles that should have been impossible. I did all of this without fear, without pain, without the weakness of emotional attachment. I was told this was strength. I was wrong. The neural conditioning that made me an efficient warrior also made me forget why anything mattered. I could fight forever, but I couldn't remember what I was fighting for. I could command armies, but I couldn't connect with a single soldier under my command. I could win every battle, but I'd already lost everything that made victory meaningful. 3 months ago, a human prisoner taught me something our empire had forgotten. He showed me that remembering how to feel isn't weakness, it's the only thing that makes us worth saving. That plants need care, that memories matter, that grief and joy and love are not obstacles to overcome but the very things that make us strong. I'm not calling for an end to our military. I'm calling for an evolution. Elite warriors who remember their families. Officers who understand the weight of command because they can still feel compassion. Soldiers who fight not because they're programmed to, but because they choose to protect something they love. This is my challenge to every conditioned warrior in our empire, remember. Feel. Be brave enough to let yourself be human again. The galaxy doesn't need perfect weapons. It needs people who understand that some things are worth dying for because they're worth living for. I am Commander Sarathax, and I have not lost a battle in 270 years. But the greatest victory I've ever won was remembering how to cry. The garden that changed an empire. The response was immediate and divided. Half the empire called her a traitor. The other half called her a prophet. The high command ordered her arrest. Her entire fleet refused the order and stood with her instead. Other conditioned warriors across the empire began seeking ways to remember, to feel, to reconnect with what they'd lost. Underground networks formed, sharing techniques Daniel had developed, memory gardens, emotional exercises, reconnection protocols. The Krillian Empire discovered that its perfect warriors, when given the choice between efficient brutality and compassionate strength, chose the latter. Within a year, the war ended. Not through conquest, but through negotiation. Leaders who could remember why peace mattered made different choices than weapons who'd forgotten how to care. The tears that finally came. 2 years after Daniel Foster first spoke to a dying Memoria Blossom, Commander Sarathax stood in a real garden on her home world. Her daughter, Kira, stood beside her, no longer a stranger. The Memoria blossoms are thriving, Kira said, gesturing to hundreds of blue flowers blooming in the late afternoon light. The entire planet is planting them. They've become symbols of remembrance, of healing. Because of a human who refused to let them die, Sarathax replied. Daniel stood nearby with other humans, now freed from servitude, now equals in a new kind of empire. His hair was grayer, but his eyes still held that compassion that had cracked open a warrior's heart. Thank you, Sarathax said to him. For teaching me that strength and feeling aren't opposites. You taught yourself, Commander. I just showed you it was possible. Kira took her mother's hand, the first time they'd touched in 16 years. Tell me about the garden you had when you were little. The one you've been trying to remember. And as Sarathax began to speak, to share memories with her daughter in a garden blooming with hope, something happened that made Kira gasp. Tears ran down the commander's face. Real tears, not suppressed or blocked or conditioned away, but freely given, honestly felt. For the first time in 270 years, Commander Sarathax cried. Not from pain or grief, though both were present in her memories. But from joy. From connection. From the overwhelming relief of finally being able to feel again. The Memoria blossoms around them seemed to glow brighter, responding to the emotional resonance of a warrior who had remembered her heart. It hurts, Sarathax whispered, touching her chest where emotions were flooding back. After so long, it hurts to feel. Daniel smiled. I know. But you're alive now, Commander. Really alive. Yes, she agreed, and pulled her daughter into an embrace that was awkward and unpracticed but absolutely genuine. Yes, I am. The war that had lasted 300 years had ended. Not because weapons became more efficient, but because warriors remembered they were people first. Not because strength defeated emotion, but because someone had the courage to show that feeling and fighting weren't opposites, they were partners in the only battle that ever truly mattered. The battle to remain human, even when the universe tried to turn you into something less. And in a garden filled with flowers that bloomed because they were loved, a warrior who had forgotten how to cry finally remembered. Not that tears were weakness, but that they were the truest proof of strength, the courage to feel in a universe that often demanded numbness, to love in a galaxy that rewarded isolation, to remember in an empire that had perfected forgetting. The Memoria blossoms would bloom for generations, each one a reminder that empathy, not efficiency, was the greatest power in the universe. And that sometimes, the most revolutionary act a warrior can perform is learning how to cry again.